welcome to On Deck with Mike Steuart. This is going to be Limitless episode 5, Gustavia Harbor, Blood in the Water. So, the super yacht Limitless, which is owned by multi-billionaire Leslie Wexner, has over a gazillion brands that they own. Right at the top, I would say the most recognizable would probably be Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, Pink. So anyway, owned by Leslie Wexner. On a excursion voyage down to the Caribbean, we were going to Antigua for the total eclipse of the sun. Best place to view it was going to be off the coast of Barbuda. So that's where he wanted us to be, and that's where we were headed. On the way down, we were going to swing into Anguilla in the West Indies, a little French island, where his private traveling chef, so whenever he came on board the Limitless, he would travel with his own chef that was different than his resident chef. We were picking her up. She had a French restaurant in the island, on the island of Anguilla. So he just called her up, said, hey, I need you to come on board and cook for me while I am on board my yacht. So we were swinging in there to pick up her and her daughter and spent some time over in St. Martin. We couldn't get in. We had to anchor offshore because we were just too damn big. So we couldn't get into, at that time, there's a story there, how to get into a bay when your boat's too big. Just put in another bridge. So went to St. Martin, hung out there for a couple of days, picked her up in Anguilla, and then our other destination, then we were going to be picking up the owner and his entourage in St. Barts. Very well-known destination for the yachting, the jet set crowd. So again, too damn big to fit inside the harbor, or you know, that's the downsides, folks. If you want to have a mega yacht, a super yacht there's going to be a lot of places you're just not going to be able to fit in. We had what they call being on the hook, anchored off out of the harbor. It was a little area, I believe they called it Ane Rouge. It's right off of Colombier Beach. It's this really beautiful, picturesque, dozens of postcards about it. It's just white, sandy beach, crystal clear blue water. It's just shape of a half crescent moon. Just a gorgeous beach. We were right off that beach in a little area called Ane Rouge. So we were on the hook there, and then the owners were flying into St. Barts in their small private little jet, because you couldn't take a big jet in there, I don't think. It's not nearly probably long enough. But anyway, I'm telling you, flying into St. Barts is a scary deal, white knuckle situation as it is. Basically, you just come in, it looks like you're crashing to the side of a mountain, and you just got to dive straight down to the runway that goes right into the ocean. So like I said, we're on the hook at Ane Rouge, and we're just going to have to ferry on the tenders. We'll call our ribs rigid inflatable boats. So we're going to be taking that back and forth with all the supplies, the cargo, groceries, fresh fruit, what have you. And security entourage will be traveling with the family, and they'll go on some other tenders. We have about 4 tenders on the Limitless. We've got like the 31-foot nautic type pontoon tenders. We've got 2 handmade mahogany wood crafted Serenellas at a nice hefty price tag, about $1 million a piece. One's a limousine version and one's a convertible version. And then we have like a Sea-Doo for running around, cleaning up the water line and running back and forth. So first thing what we do is we're going to have a little meeting. There's a flurry of activity, owners coming on board, the boat's ready to go, but there's a lot of coordinating that has to be done. So as the mate, I was going to be running the rib, the rigid bottom inflatable boat. It is what we call a dive tender, meaning the bow has cables on it and to a motor that would open up and you can go in and out, your scuba diving, go in and out relatively easier than climbing over the pontoons or a ladder off the stern. And that's what I was going to be using to ferry everybody and all the goods and cargo back and forth. I jumped in. Everything looks good. I did notice that boat had previously been what we call locked out, tagged out. It means isolated and rendered inoperative. So it's an OSHA required safety procedure used in the industry to ensure that dangerous machines are properly shut off and not able to be started up again prior to the completion of the maintenance or repair work. So the guy who's working on the equipment has the key. You announce the shut off. You identify the energy sources. You isolate said energy sources, and you lock and tag out the energy source. Remove the key. Put a lock on it. And then you got to prove that it's effective, which means somebody can't get in there and turn it on. So basically it's just a way to let everybody know that this thing is de-isolated, not to de-isolate this device and try to crank it up. So this tender had been in the maintenance lineup to have the work done. The cable had snapped on the bow for the operation, the bow operation. The cable had snapped, but it was removed. The locked out and tag out was removed. It was put back in service, rendered, everything was okay, cleared off the maintenance board, put back in service. So boom, I take it. I'm running back and forth. It's probably a 10 to maybe 10 minutes early, quickest 10-minute ride, 15 minutes at the most from the harbor at the docks, getting out to the boat. So maybe 10, 15, 12-minute drive. It's about my 6th or 7th run. I haven't had any issues whatsoever. And then at this run, I'm taking on the chef and her daughter, 11, 12, 13-year-old daughter, and then the owner's personal valet. Young man about my age. I was in my mid-30s, and taking him, so welcome them on board, bringing on their stuff, their gear, their bags, some groceries, getting them all situated on the tender. Had the personal valet sitting right in front of the center console where I was going to be driving the boat. And then the chef and her daughter were going to be sitting behind me in a little settee located right in front of the engines. So we take off out of Gustavia Harbor. Beautiful day, absolutely gorgeous conditions. Just another gorgeous, beautiful day in the Caribbean. So there's some rocks over to the on the port side. Right when you come out, you're going to see the Gustavia lighthouse off of our starboard side, and then you pass that. There's some rocks over to your port side, and there was an old wreck, an old yacht that had crashed into the rocks, caught fire, and they just left it there. It was like just a hulking, rusted skeleton of this vessel. And so as I'm bringing our little tender up to speed, I'm joking with the personal valet. You know, we had met a few times, and so we had a little bit of a friendship going. So I'm joking with him, you know, everybody on board. You know, hey, that was my last gig right there. You know, that thing that crashed into the rocks. And so we're just getting up on a plane, you know, just getting up to top speed of the tender. Maybe doing 15, 17 knots. There was another tender that had just passed in front of us. I mean, this whole harbor is just a flurry of activity. Sailboats and tenders everywhere, crisscrossing one another constantly. So, you know, when a boat goes by in front, they leave a wake. As soon as you get up and you pass somebody's wake, that's a couple little boom, 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 you hit. Well, when we passed over this wake, and we came back down off the wave it created, bam! The front of the bow of the rib opened up, sucking the personal valet right out from in a microsecond, right out in front of me. We came to a complete stop, jolted to a complete stop. He's gone. They're screaming hysterically behind me. The boat's completely full of water, being that there's a giant hole in the front now. So we're full of water. I look behind me. I mean, this happened in less than a blink of an eye. I look behind me. The personal valet is doing his dead man's float about 100 feet or so behind me, just like that. You know, and there's all sorts of maneuvers to do when you have a situation like that, what we call man overboard or an MOB. You know, there's all sorts of maneuvers to do when that happens. So there's 3 distinct turns, maneuvers that you're supposed to enact, that you were trained as a water rescue, survival, water survival, to get your captain's license. All this comes in this training, will be drilled into your head, the specific maneuvers you need to do. And will be the Williamson turn, the Anderson turn or a single turn, and then the Charnov turn. So with all this training in your head, let me tell you what, it happens that quickly. That quickly, an accident can occur. An incident will happen. You don't have even the time to react. Just to recap, we're in St. Barts, pulling out of Gustavia Harbor, headed back to the Limitless. I've got some very valuable cargo on board. I've got 3 souls besides myself that I'm taking care of, first and foremost. The first one being the owner's personal valet, then his traveling private chef and her daughter, her young daughter. So we're headed back, boom, the bow opens up, sucks out the personal valet right out. He's behind us 100 feet in the blink of an eye. The 2 women, young women on board are hysterically crazy. They're not really offering any help. So you have to resort back to your training, always back to your training. So the first aid training definitely states, you know, that you want to assess the situation. So I'm sitting there, I'm trying to figure out, I need to get back and pull Doug out of the water first and foremost. But I need to make sure that I don't injure him or us in the process. I'm assessing the situation. You have to fall back on your training. So the first thing I know to do is I got to assess the situation. We've got the valet behind us a couple of 100 feet. He's in the water floating face down. I just ran over, I don't know what his medical condition is, but it's pretty serious. The tender's become inoperable. It's not responding to steering. The steering cable has been snapped in the impact of coming to a complete and sudden stop. It's full of water. We're in pontoon, so it's not sinking, but it's full of water. And I can't maneuver back, so I've got to jump in the water, swim back to him, and bring him back. So that's what I do. But before I do that, I get on the radio and call the Limitless bridge and let them know that we need medical assistance to dispatch the other tenders to my position immediately, and then try to calm the girls down a little bit, and then boom, I jump overboard, swim to Doug. As soon as I reach him, he comes to, and I get him back to the tender, get him back on board. He's got a big, not obviously, but I inspect him. Yeah, when you're dealing with a head trauma, which he obviously had, there was blood coming down from his head. You're not supposed to move the victim around, but I had to get him out of the ocean. I had to get him out of the water, put him on board, sit him down, stop the bleeding, check for any other injuries, see if he was conscious, see if he could follow my fingers, you know, if he was suffering some sort of a brain trauma. In the meantime, help is on its way. They're getting ready to dispatch another tender to pick him up in the chef and her daughter, take them back to St. Barts, have him checked out in the emergency room at the hospital. So we get him all bandaged up. He knew when he said, as soon as I felt the water, I knew I had to dive deep to avoid getting my head split open by the propellers. Luckily, normally traveling with personnel on board, a tender, everybody's going to have on a PFD. It's just something you would always, obviously you're going to have enough PFDs, personal flotation devices, for everybody on board. But when you're traveling, it's good because, you know what, when incidents and accidents that happen, very rarely do they ever telegraph themselves ahead of time and say, hey, you might want to go ahead and slip on your PFD right now because in another 10 seconds, we're going to have an accident. So it's good to have on your PFD before you need it. But in this case, we did not. It was a slip up. It was I'd messed up, should have had one on. We had them right there and handy, but it's hard to get guests and owners to wear stuff that's uncomfortable. They just didn't want to wear it. Probably didn't even think about putting it on. Like I said, I had made so many trips back and forth without any passengers. It just wasn't at the forefront of my mind. getting lost in the small talk and chatter of welcoming somebody on board your boat. But in this case, it worked out really good for Doug. Had he had his PFD on, it would have made it virtually impossible for him to dive as deep as he did to avoid getting his head split open by the propellers. Had he had on a PFD, he would have remained fairly buoyant and would have been ripe target for the propellers. Luckily, he was just struck by the skag, that little part that goes right underneath the propellers of an outboard engine to protect the propellers from hitting a rock or a reef. So he just got nailed by the skag. A dozen so stitches patched him up good as new, and he was back on the boat, back on the Limitless in a few hours.